Hi guys, Billy S here, welcome back to my Dark Souls area rankings for Dark Souls month, the month where I post new Dark Souls themed videos every Wednesday. If you haven't seen part 1, which contains all the areas ranked from 26th to 11th, click the card in the top right corner or check the first link in the description. Thank you for tuning in, let's jump right into number 10. Starting off my top 10, we have Ash Lake, an area that shares similarities to the Kiln. It's an area that really pushes style over substance, but I just enjoy the aesthetic of Ash Lake far more than I adore the aesthetic of the Kiln. From the moment you escape the Great Hollow and you're greeted with this abyssal expanse of dark, murky water, you look up into the sky, music starts playing, you look back down, it stops, you look back up, it starts again. Arch trees jutting out of the ocean, a single black hydra swimming around the waters, a lone bonfire on a sand dune, and a path leading towards a large tree in the distance. It feels like you've discovered something you shouldn't have, something that was long forgotten at the depths of the world. This area arguably has more significance than the Kiln, as it contains a miracle, Great Magic Barrier, which is needed for 100% completion, as well as access to the Dragon Covenant. Nothing really prepares you for entering the everlasting Great Dragon's hollow as it unfurls itself to you. You're looking at one of the last dragons who survived the war with humanity, and you can even chop off its tail for the Dragon Greatsword, which ended up being my weapon of choice for the rest of the playthrough. Ash Lake is just a vibe. Impressive but unsettling. All we see is a hydra lurking in the waters, but that pitch black lake could be hiding so much more. What else lies below that we have yet to see? It almost makes me think of Lovecraft and Cthulhu. What forbidden knowledge lies in the murky depths? A notice to subscribe to Billy S because 90% of my viewers aren't subscribed, let's rectify that? How bizarre. The opening area of the DLC, they knew what they were doing when they decided to make a fresh variation of the Darkroot Woods. Taking a map that we all knew from the base game and spicing it up, giving us a glimpse into the past of the land of Darkroot, and perhaps even giving context to the Darkroot name, as this is the land where the Abyss took root in Ulasil. You can see places like Alvina's Tower, which is now a shortcut. There are stone guardians littered throughout in their prime, gardeners attending to the groves, and best of all, no giant cats. I like that while this area does funnel you down a specific path, there are tons of little side areas to explore if you're willing to make a jump or two. You'll find more enemies, a few extra items. It's satisfying to clear this area out. Of course, this area also has the river chasm, which leads down to the Darkroot Basin before it was flooded, containing the Calamite boss arena, one of the coolest locations when you realize, and yes, I'm repeating this fact again from last video, the ladder you take down to the basin floor is the same shortcut ladder from the main game! And realizing that by beating this DLC and defeating Calamite, you're actually laying the groundwork for the gods to develop the Undead Burg and the settlements you see in the present. Of course, the best feature of the area is the Colosseum, where you fight Artorias. The boss arena is grandiose and epic, contrasting the somber melancholy of the duel that awaits you. And I like the touch that you'll always see that one corpse at the entranceway. Royal Woods takes an already fantastic area and creates so much context around it that it makes both areas shine fantastically. The painted world of Ariamis is one of the best designed interconnected areas in the game, if not the best, with its compact world design that revolves around your single bonfire. Appearing on a broken bridge with no way out, pulled into a painting, and forced to complete this area to escape? Yeah, that's intimidating. The cold, snowy expanse is a stark contrast from the warm tones of Anor Londo, a land that is seemingly hostile to the undead, yet apparently is full of peaceful and kind individuals. You can tell this was the first area designed for Dark Souls because it is steeped in Demon Souls level design. A single starting point, a single ending point, tons of checkpoint shortcuts that wrap back to your only bonfire, and a whole host of different enemies to face, including 2 literal Demon Souls references with the Phalanx enemies in the courtyard, and while I didn't get footage of it this playthrough, the invader that wears the head wrap of the old monk. I really enjoy the sprawling and sometimes confusing layout of the area, but the reason why it's not in my top 5 or 3, unlike most people who rank these areas, is quite simply, I hate every enemy type native to the Painted World. Hollows that inflict toxic on you, crow creatures that can swarm you and are a pain in the ass to farm for Covenant items offline, the phalanx which can overwhelm you with snipers, and because they respawn, what's the point in killing them? Of course, I can't forget the bone wheel skeletons in the catacombs. I really want to enjoy this area. It feels almost like this puzzle box you have to solve, and of course Priscilla and her arena are gorgeous. But if the enemies were just better, maybe it would be higher, but they just make me miserable. So many players see the depths as filler content, an area you can skip with the master key, and to an extent I do agree. I would much rather enter Blighttown through the water wheel as well, but when I think about the most memorable areas in Dark Souls for me personally, the depths is always up there in my top areas. On your first playthrough, you will have to go through the depths. You will have to experience this level. You enter a butcher's workshop and have to survive the hollows, cannibals, and dogs. If you take the normal path, you enter the slime hallways and realize you need a key further in to access this area's bonfire. The sheer panic of being low on Estus and wondering where the heck that key is was just the right amount of adrenaline for a first playthrough. After unlocking the bonfire, you have these cramped tunnels with sneaky holes waiting to drop the player if you're not careful. You can kill a channeler on a balcony to avoid it buffing the area boss, similar to the Fool's Idol in Demon Souls. If you don't fall into any holes, you'll come across a giant rat and a water slide, dropping you into the lowest depths. On the one hand, rats and progression, on the other, deadly basilisks that will test your ability to crowd control. I won't judge anybody for admonishing the depths basilisks, especially if you fell into their chambers from one of the holes in the corridors above, but I think this is the fairest use of this enemy type in the franchise, and is much easier to clear out on repeat playthroughs. Still, I remember getting cursed in the depths once and having to run all the way back up to the female merchant in the Undeadburg waterway to get a purging stone. I learned my lesson. What I love about the depths though is that on a second playthrough, you can speedrun through. Drop down the hole behind the butchers into the large rat room, hug the left side of the water slide, and get to the end of the area instantly. It's an interconnected maze that I felt fantastic overcoming my first time, and the slight gameplay tweaks like a bonfire you needed to unlock, and the traps leading to the lowest part of the sewers, it just trains you up. I love this area so much, even if nobody else does. Just missing out on the top 5, Firelink Shrine is our hub, a place to rest and recuperate between ventures into the world. Every NPC we save inevitably comes to these ruins to rest, warming themselves by the fire. There are a few hidden items to find throughout the area, the chests below the Undead Parish lift, the Undead Asylum key in the crow's nest if you do a little parkour. There's a small graveyard containing skeletons that will whoop your ass if you're a new player, but is worth running through for the Zweihander if you're a strength build. And there's the little hill of hollows leading up to the Undeadburg, where if you do a tricky jump you can get access to a Ring of Sacrifice. Firelink represents a central location in Dark Souls. It's connected to almost every major location you need. It really hits you how important this place is when you ring the 2 bells and find your bonfire extinguished. So saving the Firekeeper becomes an important mission, and restoring her fills the player with hope. And of course, that music. I don't need to say anything else about that. I mean, it's playing right now. It's iconic. It is the moment. It only misses out on the top 5 because it's a hub, and I want my 5 best areas to be actual levels that you work through. Just squeaking into the top 5, we have the Sen's Funhouse of Fuckery, the Torture Trap of Travelers, the Way of the Warrior of Lordran. Sen's Fortress is your final challenge on your pilgrimage to the land of the gods. And if it wasn't clear by the arrow trap at the doorstep, then the narrow beam with deadly swinging axes should tell you that the gods are very picky about who gets to visit them. Sen's Fortress is memorable for having a confusing layout with multiple ways to progress, while introducing the concept of deadly traps, level hazards, and tougher enemies to deal with. Those ranged snake enemies are brutal in certain rooms. On the lowest level is a pool of Titanite demons, though maybe don't try killing the ones in the furthest room, they're scaled to a higher level. Nothing makes me chuckle more than seeing this snake get destroyed by a rolling wall. Of course, many will remember Sen's Fortress for introducing them to their first mimic, which is, once again, iconic. We stan. Truly the moment. But then further back, you have the bloody elevator, which I think is more memorable. It will kill you if you stay on it too long. Also iconic. We stan. Truly the moment. I'm so sorry, I'm gay. If you can make it through the swinging axes and snake men, the upper half of Sen's Fortress is a lot simpler, especially if you actually discover the hidden bonfire just off this ledge. I didn't my first playthrough, so you can imagine how frustrating that was. Just be careful of the giant throwing firebombs. You can also fight Ricard for his rapier, do a tricky jump for some extra gear, and a path to the cage key, which activates a shortcut to the bottom of the fortress, and there's still optional items galore to find. You can spend hours wandering this fortress without finding everything, and I love it. It's just the right spike in difficulty, but unlike Blighttown, you can access Andre and Firelink, so you can actually prepare all you need before you tackle the ascent. My favorite location from the DLC, Ulasil Township, is this slow descent into a town consumed by the abyss, where as you go, the stone begins to warp. Fairly innocuous villas turn to halls infested with dark creatures. There are a nice amount of extra paths to explore, each with their own important goodies to find. Of course, you have the hidden pendant behind an illusory wall, which comes in handy against Manus later on, and then in the large building further down you can find the crest key, which allows you to open up the room with Hawkeye Goch back in the Colosseum. Beyond that, I really like the enemy designs here. The people of Ulasil have become deformed and warped beyond recognition, and while they certainly hit hard, I enjoy the challenge that comes from them. Sometimes you will get a slightly unfair enemy position, like having the Dark Mages in this room on a side path that you can't see until you enter, but for the most part it's a fair challenge. The verticality of descending towards the source of the abyss honestly reminds me a lot of descending Old Yharnam in Bloodborne. You can see the area you need to get to, all that remains is to get down to it. Thank God for the level shortcut leading back to the bonfire though, as without this elevator, the last stretch of level would be brutal, as the group of 5 enemies guarding the hall beyond have killed me more times than I care to admit. It's a perfect setup where the mages will take you out if you turn your back on them. And then the grotesque creature you battle afterwards, deformed and experimented upon, sets you up for the horror of what's to come. Getting surprise attacked on another elevator before heading down to the Ulasil dungeons where Manus was originally kept. His cell is jarring, disturbing, and opens up into the abyss beyond. This area has fantastic environmental storytelling and really feels like you're descending into a place you shouldn't be. Starting out my top 3, we have the Undead Burg, the first major area of the game once you arrive in Lordran. The intended path for first-time players, the Burg is designed to teach you everything you need to know about Dark Souls level design as seamlessly as possible. The enemies go down fairly easily, but can swarm you without careful positioning, and they leave the harder shielded enemies for later in the level, giving a nice sense of scaling. There are multiple optional paths you can go down containing simple items that you can use, like a crossbow or optional soul items. There's even a hidden merchant past the 2 spear wielders who, if you kill, you can obtain the Uchi Katana, a strong early game weapon. You get access to one of the most memorable bonfires in the game as well, your focal point for exploration here. In the second half of the level, you learn about level hazards with the firebombers forcing you to sprint past them, and then get treated to a room filled with enemies that you have to navigate through. From there, the level doesn't let up, sending tougher enemies your way as you explore the latter half of the Burg. If you bought the residence key from the merchant, you can also get access to gold pine resin for buffing your weapon, and can skip some of the enemies on your way to the Taurus Demon. There's also the optional Black Knight, who you can practice your parry timing on. Black Knights are much easier to parry than you might expect, and once you get the timings down, they become so satisfying to defeat earlier and earlier in your playthroughs. If you have the Master Key, you can also unlock a path leading down to Havel the Rock, a tough NPC fight that grants you one of the best rings in the game, Havel's Ring. Worth it! I use it most playthroughs, even though I probably shouldn't, because let's be real, it's a crutch ring. Ugh. And of course, after the Taurus Demon, you gain access to Solaire of Astora, the best boy, the view of a grossly incandescent sun, and the Hellkite Bridge. First timers are gonna get charred by the dragon, but nothing beats heading down the bridge stairs, kicking a ladder, and realizing you've looped back to the Undead Burg bonfire. Overall, an incredibly iconic location with so many amazing moments and a perfect tool for teaching players what to expect as they continue through Lordran. It ranks this highly because I will just never tire of exploring and re-exploring the Undead Burg, and speedrunning it on more recent playthroughs just feels so good. At number 2, we have the Golden City of the Gods, Anor Londo. From the moment your eyes meet that spectacular view and the music kicks in, you know you're in for a special area. Only it might not be special in the way you expect. As an environment, it's stunning. The architecture of the cathedral, the city teeming below, the walkways perfectly paved. There's no flaws, no decay, and the entrance to the city is guarded by giant towering knights. But this place, however, is empty. There's no hustle and bustle of life, beyond the painting guardians, the towering knights, and the silver knights to speak of. A single giant blacksmith is your only true companion in this area, aside from Solaire and Siegmeyer. Though Solaire, you can flirt with me anytime. The level layout is linear, clean, and expansive. Everything is so overscaled, like the stair lift outside, the giant doors leading to the cathedral, stuff like that, but that cleanliness feels artificial. Obviously, we know the Anor Londo we see is but an illusion of the optional femboy of the Souls series, Gwyndolin, and that makes the emptiness of Anor Londo that much more striking. But that's also why it's not my favourite area in the series. I love the enemies, even the Anor Londo archers. It's capped off of one of the best fights in the game, and one of the best sights in the game, and yet, traversing Anor Londo can be a bit tedious. Going from the starting bonfire to the cathedral, there's nothing there if you kill the gargoyles. And should you dispel the illusion and defeat Gwyndolin? In that case, there's nothing left here in the City of the Gods. Lore-wise, it works, but from a gameplay perspective, I always felt like I just wanted a teeny tiny bit extra from Anor Londo, something that I genuinely and sadly can't explain. There's a void when I visit here, like I'm supposed to adore this area from the bottom of my heart like everyone else, but my heart just does not belong. Yet I cannot deny how brilliant this area is to go through and how amazing the reward of completion truly is, and it is 100% worthy of number 2. But my number 1... I don't know any other Souls creator who has expressed Darkroot Garden as their favorite location from the Dark Souls game, because it doesn't necessarily have everything that makes an area like Undead Burg or Anor Londo so good, and yet for me, it's my favorite area to explore. From the way you arrive in the early game and have multiple paths at your disposal, you can head down the slope to the woods leading to the Moonlight Butterfly, complete with stone soldiers, demonic plants, and fake trees. There are also these lizards that only show up here in this very hidden nook of the garden, and I find this little area fascinating. I want to know more about these guys. While the Moonlight Butterfly is one of my bottom tier bosses, the aesthetic of its arena, a crumbling bridge covered in foliage that you walked under when entering the area, is so cool. You get a divine ember for your troubles, and you feel like you've explored a lot. So when you realize there's an entire 50% of the level you haven't explored yet, that's a crazy feeling. By either purchasing the Seal of Artorias or using the secret ladder from the Darkroot Basin, you can enter the Darkroot Woods. This area is of course a PvP hotspot due to the Forest Hunters Covenant, which you can join to stop the NPC characters here from attacking you. Beyond that, there are tons of items to find, a few mushroom people, 3 psychotic cats, and of course the boss waiting at the end. Ignoring the battle itself, Sif's arena is a gorgeous glade of tragedy, and Artorias' grave is a strong send-off for such a legendary hero, a far cry from the tiny footnote of a grave in the DLC. I like that Darkroot is so approachable from so many angles, and you can realistically come here and complete both segments of the area at any point in your playthrough. You can slot it in whenever, wherever, and it will always make sense. I'm also just a sucker for blues, greens, and the night sky, so Darkroot also has the sheer ambiance factor going for it that I just don't get from Anor Londo's yellows and oranges. This is a biased pick, but this is a list based on my opinion, and it's not a definitive guide to these areas. So for me, Darkroot Garden is my official favorite area in Dark Souls 1. Thank you so much for watching. I know my list will not reflect yours, so let me know your favorite and least favorite areas down below. I appreciate every one of you for tuning in. My socials are on screen now, and if you haven't already, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and feel free to follow me where you feel comfortable. I'll see you next week when we rank for the final episode of my Dark Souls month. This is a weird one, let me tell you. Every Dark Souls 1 bonfire location. Bye bye!